In the year 50,753, an ashen-faced Isaac Bryant stormed into the Great Hall on the Evora homeworld, humanity's fate and the galaxy's power balance hinging on the veteran diplomat's next words. The imposing chamber buzzed with thousands of alien dignitaries. Representatives from the Krill Imperium, Zathari Republic, Ulian Federation, and countless other star-spanning civilizations packed the hall, awaiting the session that would decide Earth's future. Only 80 years had passed since humanity's first contact, but it had been a brutal education in galactic politics. The Evora had initially welcomed Earth, but Supreme Chancellor Vola and his ilk soon showed their true colors, treating humans as little more than cannon fodder in their endless proxy conflicts. Entire human divisions were routinely sacrificed as expendable shock troops against the Evora's many enemies. The nadir came when an Evorian bioweapon placed in human hands went rogue, eradicating a third of Earth's population in a matter of days. Trust irreparably shattered, humanity turned inward, pouring its boundless ingenuity into technological advancement, biding its time as it rebuilt from the betrayal and devastation. And now the moment of retribution had arrived. Isaac's hand brushed the release on his briefcase's biometrically sealed compartment. The information contained within would bring the Evora to their knees and raise Earth to the pinnacle of galactic might. He stepped up to the speaker's podium, the future of humanity, the galaxy, and the lives of trillions across the stars resting on his next words. In that moment, Isaac knew only two outcomes were possible: humanity's ascension to its rightful place of dominance over the cosmos, or its total annihilation at the hands of a vengeful universe. Isaac's hands trembled slightly as they gripped the podium, his squeezing hard from the pressure. He took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the speech that would change everything. As he gazed out at the sea of alien faces, his mind drifted back to the events that had led to this moment. It had all started 20 years ago, in a heavily guarded research facility nestled deep within the moon's cratered surface. Earth's top scientists had been working tirelessly, poring over equations and running countless simulations. And then, finally, they had done it. They had cracked the code to faster-than-light travel. The new drive was a marvel of human ingenuity. Powered by zero-point energy, it could propel a ship at 100 times the speed of even the most advanced alien drives. But that wasn't all. The drive also had the ability to render a ship completely invisible to all known forms of detection. When word of the breakthrough reached Earth's leaders, they immediately recognized its potential. With this technology, humanity could finally level the playing field against the Evora and the other galactic powers that had long treated them as little more than pawns. But they knew they had to be careful. If word of the discovery got out, the Evora would stop at nothing to steal it for themselves. And so Project Trojan Horse was born. In hidden shipyards scattered across the solar system, Earth began constructing a massive fleet of advanced warships, each one equipped with the new zero-point drive. It was a monumental undertaking, requiring resources and manpower on a scale never before seen in human history. As the fleet took shape, Isaac played his part in the deception. In his role as Earth's ambassador, he deliberately portrayed humanity as a technologically stagnant and politically divided species, lulling the Evora and the other galactic powers into a false sense of security. Meanwhile, human spies, their abilities enhanced by cutting-edge cybernetic implants, infiltrated the highest levels of alien governments, gathering the intelligence that would be crucial in the coming confrontation. Now, as he stood before the assembled dignitaries of the Galactic Council, Isaac knew that the moment of truth had arrived. The information contained within his briefcase would expose the Evora's treachery and lay bare the full extent of humanity's newfound might. With a deep breath, he began to speak, his voice echoing through the great hall. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Council," he said, his tone measured and confident, "for too long humanity has been treated as a second-class citizen in this great galactic community. We have been used and betrayed, our people sacrificed as pawns in the endless games of power played by those who consider themselves our betters." He paused, letting his words sink in. The hall had fallen silent, every eye fixed upon him. But no more, he continued, his voice rising with each word. Today I come before you not as a supplicant but as an equal. Today I come to reveal the truth about humanity's place in the galaxy and to claim our rightful position among the stars. With a flick of his wrist, Isaac opened the briefcase, revealing a holographic display that sprang to life above the podium. On it, images and data flickered past at a dizzying speed, schematics of the zero-point drive, footage of the hidden shipyards, intercepted communications between Ivorian officials that laid bare their treachery. The chamber erupted into chaos as the implications of what they were seeing sank in. Alien diplomats shouted and gesticulated, their voices rising in a cacophony of shock and outrage. But through it all, Isaac remained calm, his eyes fixed on the Supreme Chancellor's ashen face. The age of human subservience is over, he declared, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. From this day forward, Earth and its people will take their rightful place as equals, no, as superiors, in this galaxy, and those who stand in our way will face the full might of human ingenuity and perseverance. The words hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down before the assembled powers of the galaxy. And in that moment, Isaac knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The die had been cast, and humanity's fate, and the fate of the entire galaxy, would be decided in the days and weeks to come. As gasps and murmurs filled the great hall, Isaac tapped a button on his podium, activating a hidden holographic projector within his briefcase. A massive star map burst into view, hovering above the gathered dignitaries. Glowing lines demarcated the territories of the galaxy's major powers, the Krill Imperium in red, the Zathari Republic in green, the Ulian Federation in blue, and the Evora in an sickly pulsating yellow that seemed to engulf the others. "Esteemed members of the Council," Isaac said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "while the Evora have been busy playing their games of dominance and control, Earth has been forging a new path." With a wave of his hand, the map zoomed in, focusing on a cluster of star systems near the galactic core. For the past decade, we have been reaching out to those who have grown tired of the Evora's heavy-handed tactics, species like the Kelvin, with their unparalleled mastery of advanced technology. A series of green dots lit up, scattered throughout Ivorian space. The Drath, a proud warrior race who have long chafed under the Evora's rule. More dots, this time a fierce red, blinked into existence. And the Aurorans, whose psychic abilities have been suppressed and feared by the Evora for generations. A constellation of shimmering blue points completed the picture. Isaac paused, letting the map speak for itself. The allied systems formed an intricate web, threading through and around Ivorian territory like a strangling vine. A third of the galaxy, united in common purpose. Through diplomacy, trade, and mutual support in the face of Ivorian aggression, Isaac continued, we have built a coalition that stands ready to challenge the status quo and usher in a new era of freedom and prosperity for all species. Supreme Chancellor Volar surged to his feet, his face a mask of barely contained rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice shaking with fury. "What does Earth hope to gain by this treachery?" Isaac met the Supreme Chancellor's gaze unflinchingly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Why, Chancellor?" he said, his tone almost conversational. "I thought that would be obvious." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the harsh light of the star map. "We intend to do what you have always feared, what you have worked so tirelessly to prevent." Isaac's smile widened, showing teeth. "We intend to bring about the end of Ivorian domination, once and for all, and with the strength of our allies behind us, there is nothing in this galaxy that can stop us." The Chancellor opened his mouth to retort, but Isaac silenced him with a raised hand. "The time for talk is over, Volar. Earth and its allies stand ready to do what must be done. The only question that remains." He paused, letting the tension build. Every eye in the room was fixed on him, waiting for his next words. Is whether the Evora will step aside gracefully, or be swept away in the tide of change that is to come. As the council chamber descended into an uproar, Isaac stood firm at the podium, his eyes locked with Vola's. The Supreme Chancellor's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his fists clenched at his sides. "You speak of justice and equity," Vola spat, his voice trembling with rage. "But all I see is a pathetic attempt to sow discord and chaos. These fabrications you present are nothing more than a transparent ploy to undermine the stability of the Evora's rightful rule." Isaac shook his head, a mirthless chuckle escaping his lips. "You still don't get it, do you, Vola? This isn't about undermining your rule. It's about exposing the truth of what your precious Evora have been doing behind closed doors." With a flick of his wrist, Isaac brought up a new hologram, this one showing the interior of a dimly lit facility. Rows upon rows of cylindrical tanks filled the room, each one containing a floating, humanoid figure. Tubes and wires snaked from the tanks, connecting to a central control console. "This, esteemed members of the Council, is what the Evora have been hiding from the galaxy," Isaac said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "A secret research facility where they have been conducting horrific experiments on sentient beings." He zoomed in on one of the tanks, revealing the twisted, agonized face of its occupant. Using a combination of advanced technology and psychic conditioning, the Evora have been attempting to create an army of mentally enslaved soldiers, beings stripped of their free will, their minds broken and remolded to serve their masters without question. The chamber was silent now, every eye fixed on the grotesque images playing out before them. Isaac let the footage speak for itself, the muffled screams and whimpers of the test subjects filling the air. "This is the true face of the Evora," he said at last, his voice heavy with disgust. "A species that claims to be the galaxy's guardians, but in reality is no better than the tyrants and despots they claim to oppose." Vola smacked his head on his podium, his voice rising to a shout. "Lies!" he roared, spittle flying from his lips. "These images are nothing more than human trickery designed to mislead and deceive." But his words were drowned out by the clamor of the other council members, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage and condemnation. Representatives from a dozen species were on their feet, demanding an immediate investigation into the Evora's activities. Isaac raised his hands, calling for silence. "I understand your skepticism, Supreme Chancellor," he said, his tone almost conciliatory. "After all, these revelations are difficult to believe, even for those of us who have seen the evidence firsthand." He reached into his briefcase, producing a small data drive. "That is why I come bearing more than just words and images. On this drive are the coordinates to the facility you have just seen, along with detailed schematics of its layout and security systems." Isaac held the drive aloft, his eyes scanning the room. "I invite the Council to dispatch a team of independent investigators to verify these claims for themselves. Let them see the truth of the Evora's crimes with their own eyes." He placed the drive on the podium, sliding it forward. "The choice is yours, esteemed councillors. You can continue to turn a blind eye to the Evora's atrocities and allow them to continue their reign of terror unchecked." Isaac's eyes hardened, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Or you can stand with Earth and its allies and work together to build a new future for the galaxy, a future where no species has to live in fear of enslavement or extermination at the hands of the powerful." As the council members exchanged glances, murmuring amongst themselves, Isaac stepped back from the podium. He had played his hand, laid bare the Evora's darkest secrets for all to see. Now, it was up to the rest of the galaxy to decide what to do with that knowledge. But one thing was certain: the balance of power had shifted, and the Evora's days of unchallenged dominion were numbered. Earth and its allies had drawn a line in the sand, and they would not rest until the galaxy was free from the Evora's tyrannical grip, whatever it takes. As the council chamber devolved into a maelstrom of shouting voices and accusatory gestures, Isaac's focus was shattered by the insistent buzzing of his comm implant. The device, surgically embedded behind his left ear, transmitted information directly into his cerebral cortex. allowing for secure communication even in the most chaotic environments. Isaac's eyes widened as the urgent message flashed across his visual field. Earth's intelligence network, a vast web of spies and surveillance drones scattered across the galaxy, had detected an immense Evora fleet converging on the Council's location. The ships, their hulls overflowing with weapons and sensor arrays, moved with a speed and coordination that spoke of long planning and deadly intent. In an instant, Isaac understood the true scope of Vola's treachery. The Supreme Chancellor, anticipating the possibility of his secrets being laid bare, had set in motion a contingency plan to silence all opposition with one swift, brutal stroke. The Evora flagship, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed the other Council vessels, hung in space like a coiled serpent, its supposedly unarmed exterior undoubtedly concealing enough firepower to reduce the Great Hall to molten slag. But Vola had underestimated the depths of human cunning. Even as the Supreme Chancellor rose from his seat, his voice booming across the chamber as he demanded that the Council dismiss Earth's accusations or face immediate annihilation, Isaac was already in motion. His fingers danced across the podium's hidden controls, sending a coded burst transmission to the human fleet, waiting in stealth mode just beyond the Council's sensor range. At his signal, the sleek, deadly ships of Earth's armada powered up their zero-point drives, preparing to leap into the fray at a moment's notice. Vola's eyes narrowed as he saw Isaac's hand move, and his voice took on a mocking, triumphant tone. "You see," he crowed, gesturing to the human ambassador, "even now, this upstart species seeks to sow chaos and discord, to disrupt the very foundations of our galactic order." The Supreme Chancellor's gaze swept the room, his expression hardening into a mask of cold drive. "I call upon the Council to reject these baseless accusations and stand with the Evora, as we have stood with you for centuries. Fail to do so, and you will face the full might of our fleet now poised to strike at the heart of this very chamber." A hushed silence fell over the room, the weight of Vola's threat hanging heavy in the air. But Isaac, his face a study in calm willpower, simply smiled. "I'm afraid you have miscalculated, Supreme Chancellor," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "The tables have turned, and the Evora's reign of terror is at an end." Isaac tapped a final command into the podium, and the star map above the Council chamber flickered and changed. A new constellation of glowing points appeared, arrayed in a tight defensive formation around the Great Hall. "Behold," Isaac said, his arm sweeping out to encompass the display, "the true might of Earth and its allies. Our ships, equipped with advanced propulsion technology and energy shielding capable of withstanding even the most powerful Evora weapons, now stand ready to defend this Council and the principles it represents." As if on cue, the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, the sudden appearance of their sleek, deadly vessels sending shockwaves through the assembled dignitaries. At the center of the formation, the massive bulk of the flagship Resilience loomed like a mountain of metal and composite, its hull shimmering with the telltale glow of zero-point energy. The voice of Admiral Nolan Drake, commander of the Resilience and architect of Earth's military strategy, boomed across the comm channels, his words echoing through the Council chamber. "Supreme Chancellor Volar," Drake said, his tone as hard and unyielding as the ship he commanded. "By order of the United Earth Government and its allies, I demand the immediate surrender of all Evora forces. Comply, and your people will be treated with the respect and dignity accorded to all sentient species." The Admiral paused, letting his words sink in. "Resist and you will face the full consequences of your actions, as the galaxy bears witness to the fall of the Evora Empire." In the heart of the Great Hall, Isaac stood tall, his eyes locked with Volar's. The Supreme Chancellor's face was a mask of rage and disbelief, his plans for dominion crumbling to dust before his eyes. The balance of power had shifted, the scales tipping in favor of Earth and its allies, and as the human fleet stood ready to defend the principles of freedom and justice, the fate of the stars hung in the balance, poised on the knife's edge between a new era of peace and a cataclysmic conflict that would shake the very stars. Volar's face contorted with unbridled rage as he smacked his head on the console. "I will never surrender to you, human filth," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "Fire the particle beam. Destroy them all." The Evora flagship shuddered as the massive weapon powered up, its muzzle glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. On the bridge of the Resilience, Admiral Drake's eyes widened as his sensors detected the sudden surge of energy. "Evasive maneuvers," he barked, his hands flying over the controls. "All ships brace for impact." The particle beam lanced out, a blinding lance of pure destruction that cut through the void of space. The Resilience lurched to the side, its engines straining as it desperately tried to dodge the incoming fire. But the beam was too fast, too powerful. It grazed the human flagship's shields, sending cascades of sparks and alarms blaring through the ship, and then, in a horrifying instant, it found its true mark. A Council transport ship, caught in the beam's path, simply vanished, vaporized in a blinding flash of light. Molten debris spun away into the void, the only remains of the once proud vessel and its crew. "No!" Isaac shouted, his heart sinking as he watched the carnage unfold on the displays. The loss of innocent life, the sheer callousness of Volar's attack, filled him with a cold, simmering fury. On the Resilience's bridge, Admiral Drake's face was grim as he assessed the situation. "All ships engage the enemy," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "Deploy fighter drones to protect the remaining Council vessels." The human fleet sprang into action, their sleek ships darting forward to meet the Evora head-on. Space lit up with the flare of energy weapons and the silent explosions of missiles as the two armadas clashed in a titanic struggle for supremacy. The Evora had numbers on their side, their ships outnumbering the humans by a significant margin, but Earth's vessels were faster, more maneuverable, their advanced technology allowing them to strike with pinpoint precision. And then there were the drones, thousands of them, each no larger than a fighter craft poured from the human ships like a swarm of angry hornets. They zipped through the battle, their advanced AI allowing them to weave and dodge through the chaos with inhuman skill. Whenever an Evora ship tried to target a Council vessel, the drones were there, throwing themselves into the line of fire with reckless abandon. They absorbed the brunt of the enemy attacks, their sacrifices buying precious time for the Council ships to escape. But even with the drones' assistance, the battle was far from one-sided. The Evora fought with the desperate ferocity of a cornered animal, their ships ramming the human vessels in kamikaze runs when their weapons failed. In the Great Hall, Isaac watched the battle unfold with growing horror. The Council members were in a state of panic, some screaming for blood, others pleading for a ceasefire. It was chaos, pure and simple. But through the madness, Isaac could see a glimmer of hope. Some of the Council members, the ones who had seen the truth of the Evora's crimes, were starting to rally, their voices rising above the din. "We must evacuate," one of them shouted, a tall, slender being with iridescent scales. "Get our people to safety before it's too late." Isaac leaped into action, his mind racing as he tried to formulate a plan. "Listen to me," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "We need to coordinate the evacuation, get as many ships out as possible." He started barking orders, his tone brooking no argument. Council members scrambled to obey, their earlier divisions forgotten in the face of this shared crisis. As the evacuation began, Isaac knew he had to act fast. Volar was still up there, still in control of the Evora flagship. As long as he lived, the battle would never end. Isaac turned to his security detail, a unwavering grit settling over his features. "We're going in," he said, his voice low and hard. "We're going to board that ship, find Volar, and end this, once and for all." The humans nodded, their faces set with a purpose that matched his own. They knew the risks, knew that this was likely a one-way trip, but they also knew what was at stake. As they made their way to the boarding craft, Isaac's mind was a whirl of thoughts and emotions. Fear, anger, hope, they all swirled within him, driving him forward. The craft launched, rocketing towards the Evora flagship like a dart. They dodged and weaved through the battle, the pilot's skills put to the ultimate test as they avoided the crisscrossing web of fire. And then they were there, the craft slamming into the flagship's hull with a bone-jarring impact. Isaac was the first one out, his plasma rifle at the ready as he charged into the enemy ship. The corridors were a maze of smoke and flickering lights, the ship's systems damaged by the ongoing battle. But Isaac and his team pushed forward, their weapons barking as they cut down the Evora soldiers who tried to bar their way. It was a brutal, close-quarters fight, the kind of battle that left no room for error or hesitation. But the humans were relentless, their augmented strength and reflexes allowing them to overcome the Evora's superior numbers. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of blood and fire, they reached the bridge. The doors were sealed, the Evora's final line of defense, but Isaac and his team were not to be denied. With a roar of exertion, they forced the doors open, storming onto the bridge like avenging angels. And there, at the center of it all, stood Vola. The Supreme Chancellor's face was a mask of rage and madness, his eyes wide and fevered. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his hand hovering over the console. "You think this is over?" But Isaac was not listening. He was moving, his rifle leveled at Vola's chest. One shot, that was all it would take. One shot to end this, to bring peace to the galaxy. And then Vola smiled, a terrible, triumphant smile. His hand slammed down on the console, and suddenly the ship was filled with a new alarm, a klaxon of warning and dread. "You're too late," Vola hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "I've activated the self-destruct. In a matter of minutes, this ship and everything around it will be nothing but atoms." Isaac's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. The Council headquarters, the heart of galactic governance, rigged with enough antimatter to reduce it to a cloud of superheated plasma. It was the ultimate act of spite, the final bold strategy of a madman who knew he had nothing left to lose. And as Isaac stared into Vola's eyes, he saw the depths of that madness, the sheer nihilistic glee of a being who would rather see the galaxy burn than admit defeat. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity as Isaac weighed his options. The self-destruct couldn't be stopped, that much was certain, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to contain the blast, to limit the damage. He keyed his comm, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. "Admiral Drake," he said, "we have a situation. Volar has activated a self-destruct mechanism linked to antimatter bombs throughout the Council headquarters." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end, and then Drake's voice came back, hard and focused. "Understood," he said. "We'll begin immediate evacuation of all Council personnel. I'm sending a tech team to your location. If there's any way to disable or isolate those bombs, they'll find it." Isaac nodded, even though he knew Drake couldn't see him. "Acknowledged," he said. "We'll do what we can from here." He turned back to Vola, his grip tightening on his rifle. The Supreme Chancellor was still smiling, still reveling in his moment of twisted triumph. "It's over, Vola," Isaac said, his voice as cold as the void of space. "Your empire, your dreams of conquest, they end here." Vola laughed, a sound that was half cackle, half sob. "You still don't understand, do you?" he said. "I am the Evora. I am the Empire. And if I cannot rule this galaxy, then no one will." And with those words he lunged forward, his hands outstretched, reaching for Isaac's throat with a mad, desperate strength. Isaac reacted on instinct, his rifle bucking in his hands as he fired, once, twice, 3 times. Vola staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He looked down at his chest, at the smoking holes that punctured his flesh, and then back up at Isaac. "You," he whispered, his voice a rattling gasp. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won?" He took a step forward, then another, his movements jerky and unsteady. And then, with a final gurgling laugh, he collapsed, his body hitting the deck with a dull, final thud. Isaac stood over him, his rifle still aimed at the fallen Chancellor's head. He watched as the light faded from Vola's eyes, as the last bitter breath escaped his lips. And then he turned, his mind already racing ahead, focusing on the task at hand. They had to find those bombs, had to stop them before they turned the council headquarters into a funeral pyre for the galaxy's hopes and dreams. It was a daunting task, a challenge that seemed all but insurmountable. But as Isaac looked at his team, at the unshakable focus etched on their faces, he knew they would not fail. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to let it all end here. They would find a way, would snatch victory from the jaws of defeat at any expense. And so, with a final silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, Isaac led his team out of the bridge, into the bowels of the ship, to face the final desperate battle for the galaxy's future. Isaac and his team stood on the bridge of the Evora flagship, their minds reeling from Volar's chilling revelation. The Supreme Chancellor's final, spiteful act threatened to turn their hard-fought victory into ashes. But even in the face of this new crisis, Isaac refused to let despair take hold. "Jameson, Riggs, get on those consoles," he barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Find out everything you can about those bombs, schematics, detonation sequences, anything that might give us an edge." The two soldiers nodded, their fingers already flying over the ship's control panels. Isaac turned to the rest of his team, his eyes hard and focused. "The rest of you secure the bridge. We can't afford any surprises." As his team sprang into action, Isaac turned his attention to Volar. The Supreme Chancellor lay on the deck, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he clutched at his wounds. But even now, with death closing in, his eyes glinted with a mad, triumphant light. "You're wasting your time," Volar rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The bombs are keyed to my genetic signature. Only I can disarm them, and I won't. Not for you, not for anyone." Isaac crouched down beside him, his rifle still trained on the Chancellor's head. "We'll see about that," he said, his tone cold and even. "My team are the best of the best. If there's a way to stop this, they'll find it." But even as he spoke, Isaac knew that time was running out. The battle outside was reaching a fever pitch, the Resilience and its fleet pushing the Evora to the brink. If they didn't find a solution soon, it wouldn't matter who won the fight. The Council, the heart of galactic governance, would be nothing but a memory. "Jameson, talk to me," Isaac called out, his eyes never leaving Volar's face. "What have you got?" The soldier's voice was tight with tension as he replied, "It's not good, sir. The bombs are linked to a complex biometric system. Without Volar's cooperation, we can't disarm them. Not in the time we have left." Isaac closed his eyes for a moment, his mind racing. Force wouldn't work here, that much was clear. Volar was too far gone, too consumed by his own madness to be swayed by threats or violence. But maybe, just maybe, there was another way. "Supreme Chancellor," Isaac said, his voice low and urgent, "listen to me. I know you think this is your moment of triumph, your chance to strike a blow against those who have opposed you." Volar's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his breath coming in shallow, pained gasps. "But think about what you're doing," Isaac pressed on. "If you destroy the Council, if you plunge the galaxy into chaos, what do you think will happen to the Evora? To your people?" He leaned in closer, his words as sharp and precise as a surgeon's blade. "Without the Council, without the stability it provides, the Evora's power will crumble. Your empire will collapse, torn apart by rebellion and infighting. Is that what you want? Is that the legacy you want to leave behind?" Volar's eyes flickered, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his expression. Isaac seized on it, pushing harder. "But if you stand down now, if you choose peace over destruction, you could be remembered as a visionary, a leader who had the courage to end a war that had gone on for far too long." He held Volar's gaze, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You have the power to shape the future, Supreme Chancellor, the power to forge a new path for your people, for the entire galaxy. Don't throw it away in a moment of spite and rage." For a long, tense moment, Volar was silent, his eyes locked with Isaac's. The bridge was deathly quiet, save for the muffled sounds of the battle raging outside. And then, with a shuddering breath, Volar nodded. "Very well," he said, his voice a rasping whisper. You have your peace, human, but know this." He coughed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "The Evora will not forget this day. We will not forget what you have done." With a trembling hand he reached out, his fingers brushing against the console. A series of lights flashed, and then with a final, soft chime, the self-destruct sequence disengaged. Isaac let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was over. They had won. But even as relief washed over him, a sudden urgent shout from Jameson snapped him back to reality. "So the Evora flagship is powering up its weapons. They're targeting the Resilience." Isaac spun around, his eyes widening in horror as he saw the telltale glow of the particle beam cannon, its muzzle aimed directly at the human fleet's command ship. "Volar, stop!" he shouted, lunging for the console, but it was too late. With a blinding flash of light, the cannon fired, its beam cutting through the void of space like a searing lance. The Resilience's shields flared, a shimmering barrier of energy that absorbed the brunt of the impact. But even as the flagship weathered the blow, Isaac's heart sank as he saw the figure of Admiral Drake, silhouetted against the view screen, stagger and fall, his body pierced by a shard of molten metal that had punched through the weakened shields. "No!" Isaac screamed, his voice raw with anguish and rage. He turned to Vola, his rifle leveled at the Chancellor's head. But the Evora leader was already gone, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling, a final bitter smile etched on his lips. Around them, the Evora flagship shuddered and groaned, its systems failing as the human fleet closed in, their weapons hammering at its weakened hull. Isaac knew they had only moments before the ship was destroyed, before the Resilience and its crew were avenged. But as he looked at the fallen form of Admiral Drake, at the man who had been his mentor, his friend, and his guiding light through the darkest of times, Isaac felt a cold, hollow emptiness settle in his chest. They had won the battle, had saved the Council and the galaxy from destruction, but at what cost? How many more would have to die before the cycle of violence and retribution finally came to an end? Isaac didn't know, but as he led his team off the bridge as they raced through the disintegrating corridors of the Evora flagship towards the waiting escape pods, he made a silent vow. He would not let their sacrifices be in vain. He would not rest until the galaxy was truly at peace, until the wounds of the past were healed and a new era of unity and cooperation could begin. It was a daunting task, a challenge that would test him to his very limits. But Isaac knew he had no choice. For the sake of all those who had fallen, for the sake of the generations yet to come, he would see it through. No matter the cost. As the echoes of the battle faded, Isaac and his team moved swiftly to secure the Evora leadership. They found Volar slumped in his command chair, his face ashen and his eyes hollow. The once proud Supreme Chancellor offered no resistance as the human soldiers placed him in restraints, his spirit broken by the weight of his defeat. Across the ship, Evora crew members laid down their weapons, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and trepidation. Many had served out of fear rather than loyalty, and the prospect of a galaxy without Volar's iron grip filled them with a cautious hope. Isaac dispatched a squad to escort the prisoners to the Resilience's brig, while he and the rest of his team swept the flagship for any remaining pockets of resistance. The ship's corridors were a maze of twisted metal and sparking wires, a testament to the ferocity of the battle that had raged within its hull. As they made their way back to the hangar bay, Isaac's comm crackled with an incoming transmission. "Ambassador Bryant, this is Lieutenant Samir Patel of the Resilience. Admiral Drake has been stabilized, but his injuries are severe. We are prepping him for emergency surgery now." Isaac felt a weight lift from his shoulders, replaced by a new sense of urgency. "Understood, Lieutenant. Keep me informed of any changes in his condition. And Samir, thank you." "Just doing my job, sir. Patel out." In the hangar bay, Isaac found a scene of controlled chaos. Human medics triaged the wounded, while engineers worked to repair the damage to the Resilience's hull. In the midst of it all, a familiar figure caught Isaac's eye. "Jameson, report," he called out. striding over to where the soldier stood. Jameson snapped to attention, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "The Evora have surrendered unconditionally, sir. We've taken control of their ships and are in the process of securing all weapons and technology." Isaac nodded, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps. "Good work. We need to move quickly to establish a provisional government and begin the process of dismantling the Evora's power structure. The council members will need our support and guidance in the days ahead." As if on cue, the doors to the hangar bay slid open, revealing a group of shell-shocked dignitaries. They stumbled out of their ships, blinking in the harsh light, their faces a mix of relief, confusion, and fear. Isaac stepped forward, his voice ringing out across the cavernous space. "Esteemed members of the council, I know you have been through a great deal in these past few hours, but I assure you, the worst is behind us. The Evora's reign of terror is at an end, and a new era of peace and cooperation is about to begin." He gestured to the human soldiers and medics around them. "My people are here to assist you in any way we can. Together we will work to rebuild what has been lost and to forge a brighter future for all the peoples of the galaxy." As Isaac spoke, he could see the fear and uncertainty in their eyes begin to give way to a tentative hope. They had been through a crucible and emerged changed on the other side. Over the next few hours, Isaac worked tirelessly to organize a provisional governing council, drawing on the expertise and knowledge of the various council members. They began the daunting task of untangling the web of Evora influence that had permeated every level of galactic society, from trade agreements to military alliances. At the same time, Isaac dispatched teams of human specialists to the coordinates of the Evora's mind control research facilities. Their orders were clear: to shut down the experiments immediately, destroy all research data, and provide whatever aid and support they could to the test subjects who had endured such unimaginable horrors. It was a monumental undertaking, one that would require every ounce of skill, diplomacy, and dedication that Isaac and his team could muster. But as he looked out at the faces of the council members, at the human soldiers and medics working side by side with their alien counterparts, he knew that they would not fail. For this was more than just a victory over the Evora. It was a triumph of the very ideals that had driven humanity to reach for the stars in the first place. A belief in the fundamental dignity and worth of every sentient being, regardless of their species or origin. And as Isaac stepped up to the podium to address the gathered representatives, he felt a sense of purpose and clarity that he had never known before. "My friends," he began, his voice strong and clear, "we stand today on the threshold of a new era, an era in which the peoples of the galaxy will no longer be divided by fear, hatred, or mistrust, but united by a common vision of peace, progress, and prosperity." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The road ahead will not be easy. There will be challenges and obstacles at every turn, but I believe that together we can overcome them, for we have seen today what can be accomplished when we stand together, when we fight for what is right, and when we refuse to let the forces of tyranny and oppression triumph over the hopes and dreams of the many." Isaac's voice rose to a crescendo, his passion and conviction ringing out in every word. "Let us seize this moment, then. Let us build a new galactic order, one founded on the principles of equality, cooperation, and mutual respect. Let us create a future in which every sentient being, no matter their species or origin, can live in freedom and dignity, secure in the knowledge that they are part of something greater than themselves." As he spoke, Isaac could feel the energy in the room shifting, the atmosphere electric with possibility. The council members were leaning forward in their seats, their eyes shining with a newfound sense of purpose and grit. And when he finished, the applause that erupted was like nothing he had ever heard before. It was a sound of hope and unity, of a galaxy reborn. In the days and weeks that followed, Isaac and his team worked around the clock to lay the foundations of this new galactic order. They drafted a new charter for the council, one that enshrined the principles of representative democracy and individual liberty. They created a galactic Bill of Rights guaranteeing the fundamental freedoms and protections that had been so long denied under Evora rule. and they established a joint peacekeeping force, drawn from the militaries of a dozen different species to maintain stability and security across the galaxy. It was a time of great change and upheaval, but also of tremendous promise and potential, and through it all, Isaac remained at the center of the storm, guiding the galaxy forward with a steady hand and an unwavering commitment to justice. Late one night, as he sat in his makeshift office aboard the Resilience, Isaac received a message on his secure comm. It was from Lieutenant Patel with an update on Admiral Drake's condition. Ambassador Bryant, I'm pleased to report that Admiral Drake has made it through surgery and is now in stable condition. He's still got a long road ahead of him, but the doctors are optimistic about his chances for a full recovery. Isaac felt a rush of relief wash over him, followed by a pang of guilt. In the chaos of the past few days, he had scarcely had a moment to think about his friend and mentor. But he knew that Drake would understand, would have wanted him to put the needs of the galaxy first. As the negotiations on the Council headquarters progressed, with Isaac and the representatives working tirelessly to lay the foundations of a new galactic order, an urgent message came through on the secure channels. Zarax, Vola's former second-in-command and a staunch Evora loyalist, had refused to accept the surrender and vowed to continue the fight against the human-led coalition. Intelligence reports indicated that Zarax had retreated to a heavily fortified stronghold on the remote planet of Keldax Prime, a world long known as a bastion of Evora military might. From there, he had begun rallying support among the Evora's vassal species, those who had long chafed under the yoke of human occupation, and now saw an opportunity to strike back against their perceived oppressors. Isaac and the council members knew they had to act quickly to prevent the loyalists from reigniting the conflict and undoing all the progress they had made. They dispatched a joint Human Council task force, led by the newly promoted Captain Takeshi Sato, to neutralize the threat before it could escalate further. Sato, a seasoned veteran of countless battles against the Evora, was known throughout the fleet for his unorthodox tactics and his ability to think outside the box. As the task force approached Keldax Prime, he studied the sensor readings with a grim intensity, taking in the network of orbital weapon platforms and the fleet of Evora warships that surrounded the planet like a filled wall of steel. "So they're not making this easy for us," he muttered to his second-in-command, a fierce-looking Drath warrior named Kroll. "But then again, nothing worth doing ever is." Kral nodded, his reptilian eyes glinting with anticipation. "What's the plan, Captain?" he asked, his voice a low, guttural growl. Sato leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "We can't take them head-on," he said. "Those orbital platforms would tear us to shreds before we even got close. But maybe we don't have to." He tapped a few commands into the console, bringing up a holographic display of the planet's surface. "I'm thinking we send in a small team, no more than a dozen, to infiltrate the stronghold and take out Zarax before he can cause any more trouble. We'll need the best of the best, human and alien alike." Kral grinned, his sharp teeth glinting in the light. "I know just the warriors for the job," he said. "The Drath have been itching for a chance to prove themselves against the Evora." Sato nodded, his eyes still fixed on the display. "Make it happen," he said, "and tell them to be ready for anything. We don't know what kind of surprises Zarax might have waiting for us down there." As Kral left to assemble the team, Sato turned his attention back to the task at hand. He knew that the future of the stars rested on the success of this mission, and he was determined not to let Isaac and the Council down. The infiltration team made planetfall under the cover of darkness, their stealth shuttles slipping through the Evora's sensor net like ghosts. They landed in a remote canyon a few kilometers from the stronghold, the rocky walls rising up on either side like the jaws of some great beast. Sato led the way, his plasma rifle held at the ready as he picked his way through the narrow pass. Behind him, the Drath warriors fanned out in a loose formation, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They made their way slowly and carefully, every sense on high alert. The air was thick with tension, the only sound the crunch of boots on gravel and the occasional chirp of some unseen insect. And then, without warning, all hell broke loose. A hail of plasma fire erupted from the cliffs above, the searing bolts of energy tearing through the air like angry hornets. Sato and his team dove for cover, returning fire as best they could against the unseen attackers. "Ambush!" Kral shouted, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. "They knew we were coming." Sato gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. They were pinned down, outnumbered and outgunned, with no way to call for backup. It was the kind of situation that would have sent a lesser man into a panic, but Sato had been through worse before. He signaled to Kral and the others, a series of hand gestures that conveyed his intent. They would split up, half the team providing covering fire, while the other half flanked the enemy position and took them out from behind. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance they had. With a final nod, Sato and his team burst from cover, plasma bolts flying all around them as they charged up the canyon wall. The Evora loyalists were good, but Sato and his team were better. They moved with a fluid grace, their weapons flashing as they cut down the enemy one by one. In a matter of minutes it was over. The last of the loyalists fell, his lifeless body tumbling down the cliff face to land in a crumpled heap at Sato's feet. But there was no time to rest, no time to catch their breath. They had to keep moving, had to reach the stronghold before Zarax could unleash whatever new horror he had planned. Sato led the way, his eyes hard and his heart made. He knew that the real battle was still to come, and he was ready to face it head-on. As they approached the stronghold's outer perimeter, Sato and his team were met with a sight that made even the battle-hardened warriors among them pause. The walls were lined with strange, pulsing devices, their surfaces covered in a sickly green glow. "Bioscanners," Kral growled, his eyes narrowing. "They're keyed to Evora DNA. Anyone else tries to pass through and they'll be vaporized on the spot." Sato frowned, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a solution. They couldn't go around the scanners and they couldn't go through them, but maybe, just maybe, there was another way. He turned to one of the Drath warriors, a massive brute named Goran. "You said you had a knack for tech, right?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Goran nodded, his eyes glinting with understanding. "I can rig up a bypass," he said, his fingers already dancing over the surface of one of the scanners. "Give me 5 minutes." Sato nodded, his eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of trouble. They were exposed out here, vulnerable to attack from all sides. Every second counted. But Goran was as good as his word. In less than 5 minutes he had the scanners deactivated, their sickly glow fading to a dull, lifeless grey. Sato and his team moved forward, their weapons at the ready as they entered the stronghold proper. The corridors were dark and narrow, the air thick with the stench of sweat and fear. They moved quickly and quietly, their senses on high alert for any sign of the enemy. But the deeper they went, the more Sato began to feel a sense of unease. Something was wrong here, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. And then, as they rounded a corner and entered a large open chamber, he saw it. Zarax stood in the center of the room, his arms outstretched and his eyes blazing with a mad, fanatical light. Around him, a dozen Evora scientists worked feverishly at a series of consoles, their hands flying over the controls with a desperate urgency. "Welcome, Captain Sato," Zarax said, his voice dripping with malice. "I'm so glad you could join us for this historic moment." Sato raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's over, Zarax," he said, his voice hard and unyielding. "Surrender now, and you might just live to see trial." But Zarax only laughed, a high, manic sound that sent chills down Sato's spine. "Oh, I don't think so, Captain," he said, his eyes gleaming with a twisted sort of triumph. "You see, while you and your council friends have been busy patting yourselves on the back, I've been hard at work on a little project of my own." He gestured to the consoles, to the screens that flickered and danced with streams of complex genetic code. "Behold, the future of warfare," he said, his voice rising to a fever pitch. A virus that targets specific genetic markers, a weapon that can wipe out entire species with the push of a button. Sato's eyes widened in horror as he realized the full implications of what Zarax was saying. A biological weapon, one that could be tailored to attack any species, any world. It was the stuff of nightmares, a horror beyond imagining. "You're insane," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You can't possibly think you can control something like that. It'll consume everything, even you." But Zarax only smiled, a smile that was all teeth and madness. "Oh, but I can control it, Captain," he said, his finger hovering over a large red button on the console. "And I will. The Evora will rise again, and all who oppose us will be swept away in a tide of blood and fire." Sato knew he had only one chance, one moment to act before it was too late. He lunged forward, his rifle forgotten as he threw himself at Zarax with a roar of pure primal fury. The two men crashed to the ground, their bodies locked in a desperate struggle for control. Around them, the chamber erupted into chaos, plasma bolts flying as Sato's team engaged the Evora scientists in a brutal close-quarters battle. But Sato barely noticed, his entire being focused on the madman beneath him. He pummeled Zarax with his fists, his blows fueled by a rage that bordered on madness. But Zarax was strong, his body enhanced by years of Evora genetic engineering, and he fought back with a savagery that matched Sato's own. They rolled across the floor, trading blows and curses in a primal animalistic display of violence. But even as he fought, Sato could feel the seconds ticking away, could feel the window of opportunity closing with each passing moment. And then, just as he thought all was lost, he saw it. A flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye, a blur of motion that persistenced itself into the form of Kral, the Drath warrior's plasma rifle leveled at Zarax's head. "Surrender, traitor," Kral growled, his voice as cold as the void of space, "or die where you lay." For a moment, Zarax's eyes flashed with a hint of fear, a crack in the madman's facade. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Never," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll see the galaxy burn before I surrender to the likes of you." And with that, he lunged for the console, his hand reaching for the button that would unleash his terrible weapon upon the unsuspecting galaxy. But Kral was faster. With a roar of fury, he pulled the trigger, the plasma bolt slamming into Zarax's chest with a sickening thud. The Evora loyalist staggered back, his eyes wide with shock and pain, before crumpling to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. Sato scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he stared down at Zarax's lifeless body. It was over, the threat neutralized, but even as relief washed over him, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that there were more battles to come in the days and weeks ahead. He turned to Kral, his eyes hard and his mind focused. "Secure the weapon," he said, his voice brooking no argument, "and get a message to Isaac and the Council. Tell them what happened here, and that we need to be ready for anything." Kral nodded, his eyes glinting with a grim sort of satisfaction. "Aye, Captain," he said, his voice a low, rumbling growl. "And what of the prisoners?" Sato glanced around the chamber, at the Evora scientists who now knelt on the floor, their hands clasped behind their heads in a gesture of surrender. He knew that they would have valuable information, that they could provide insight into the Evora's plans and capabilities. But he also knew that they were a potential liability, a ticking time bomb that could go off at any moment. He sighed, his shoulders slumping with the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. "Take them into custody," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We'll let the Council decide their fate, but keep a close eye on them. We can't afford any more surprises." As Kral and the others set about their tasks, Sato allowed himself a moment to catch his breath, to let the adrenaline fade from his system. They had won the day, but he knew that the war was just the beginning. There would be more battles to come, more challenges to face, but for now he allowed himself a small measure of satisfaction, a moment of pride in the knowledge that he and his team had done their duty, had struck a blow against the forces of tyranny and oppression. And as he looked out over the carnage of the chamber, at the fallen bodies of friend and foe alike, he knew that he would do it all again in a heartbeat, would lay down his life 1,000 times over to protect the fragile peace that Isaac and the Council had fought so hard to achieve. For that was the price of freedom, the cost of building a better tomorrow, and it was a price that Captain Takeshi Sato would gladly pay, now and forever. But even as the team secured the biological weapon and prepared to evacuate the prisoners, a sudden tremor shook the stronghold, the floor beneath their feet bucking and heaving like a thing alive. Sato stumbled, his eyes wide with surprise and alarm. "What the hell was that?" he demanded, his voice barely audible over the sound of groaning metal and shattering glass. Kral, his face grim, shook his head. "I don't know, Captain," he said, his hand tightening on his rifle, "but I've got a bad feeling about this." Before Sato could respond, a new alarm began to blare, the harsh grating sound echoing through the corridors like the wail of a dying beast. He glanced at the readouts on his wrist computer, his heart sinking as he saw the flashing red symbols that danced across the screen. "The containment fields," he said, his voice hollow with dread. "They're failing. The virus, it's breaking free." As the alarms blared and the stronghold shuddered around them, Captain Sato knew they were out of time. The virus, unleashed by Zarax's madness, was spreading through the facility like wildfire, threatening to escape into the atmosphere and beyond. "Lyra, tell me you have something," Sato barked into his comm, his voice strained with desperation as he fired his rifle at the advancing loyalists. In the task force's orbiting flagship, Lyra hunched over her console, her fingers flying across the controls as she analyzed the virus's genetic structure. She was a Kelvan, her mind as sharp as any blade, and she had been working frantically to find a weakness, a chink in the virus's armor. "I think I've got it, Captain," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "The virus's replication mechanism, it's vulnerable to a specific sequence of nucleotides. If I can synthesize a tailored antidote—" Sato ducked behind a shattered bulkhead as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head. "Do it," he growled, "and fast. We're running out of time down here." He turned to Kral and the others, their faces grim and streaked with sweat and blood. "We need to buy her time," he said, his voice hard with tenacity. "We hold this line regardless of the cost." They nodded, their eyes glinting with a fierce, unwavering purpose. They knew what was at stake, knew that the fate of humanity and all alien species rested on their shoulders. As Lyra worked feverishly in the lab, her mind racing as she synthesized the complex molecular chains that would form the antidote, Sato and his team fought like demons possessed. They pushed back against the loyalists, their weapons flashing in the dim, flickering light of the stronghold's corridors. But the Evora were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take their place, their eyes blazing with a fanatical, unhinged zeal. Sato gritted his teeth as a plasma bolt grazed his armor, the searing heat blistering his skin. He could feel his strength waning, could feel the weight of exhaustion and injury dragging at his limbs. But he pushed on, driven by a fierce, unyielding will. He had to hold on, had to give Lyra the time she needed. And then, just when all seemed lost, when the loyalists were on the verge of overwhelming their position, Lyra's voice crackled over the comm. "I've got it," she cried, her voice trembling with triumph and relief. "The antidote, it's ready." Sato felt a surge of hope, a flicker of light in the darkness, but even as he opened his mouth to respond, a searing pain erupted in his chest. He looked down, his eyes widening in shock as he saw the charred, smoking hole in his armor, the edges of the wound black and crackling. He staggered, his rifle falling from suddenly nerveless fingers. Around him his team fought on, their faces etched with grief and rage as they saw their captain fall. But Sato's mind was already far away, his thoughts turning to the antidote, to the countless lives that hung in the balance. With a final, titanic effort, he raised his comm to his lips, his voice a ragged whisper. Lyra broadcast the antidote, and now... And then he was falling, his vision dimming as the darkness rushed up to claim him. His last thought, as the light faded from his eyes, was of the galaxy he had fought so hard to protect, of the peace he had given his life to preserve. On the flagship, Lyra's fingers danced across the console, tears streaming down her face as she transmitted the antidote to every ship in the fleet, to every world within range. She watched as the signals spread like a wave of light, a beacon of hope in the darkness. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds and 1,000 ships, the antidote took hold, the virus withering and dying in its wake. The Loyalists, their plans thwarted and their leader dead, laid down their arms, their resistance crumbling in the face of this final, decisive blow. In the council chambers, Isaac watched the reports coming in, his heart swelling with a fierce, bittersweet pride. They had won, but at a terrible cost. So many lives lost, so much sacrifice and pain. But as he looked out at the faces of the council members, at the hope and dedication that shone in their eyes, he knew that it had not been in vain. They would build a new galaxy, a better galaxy, one that would honor the memory of those who had fallen. In the days that followed, as the council and the human leadership worked to establish a new order, Sato and his team were hailed as heroes, their names etched into the annals of galactic history. Sato himself was posthumously awarded the highest honors of both Earth and the Council, his sacrifice a shining beacon of courage and selflessness. And as Isaac stood before the memorial to the fallen, his eyes tracing the names carved into the stone, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a fierce, unshakable drive. They would not let this happen again, would not allow the mistakes of the past to be repeated. They would build a galaxy of justice and equality, a galaxy where all species could live in peace and harmony. And they would do it together, united by the bonds of friendship and common purpose. As Isaac turned to leave, a small figure caught his eye, a young human girl, her eyes wide and curious, her face alight with an innocent, hopeful wonder. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft and shy. "Are you Ambassador Bryant?" Isaac smiled, kneeling down to meet her gaze. "I am," he said, his voice warm and gentle. "And what's your name, little one?" "Mira," she said, her face breaking into a wide, gap-toothed grin. "My teacher told us about you, about how you helped safeguard the galaxy. Is it true?" Isaac felt a lump form in his throat, his eyes misting with sudden emotion. "It's true," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "But I didn't do it alone. There were so many others, so many brave men and women who gave their lives to make this possible." Mira nodded, her face serious and thoughtful. "I want to be like them when I grow up," she said, her voice filled with a fierce, stubborn tenacity. "I want to help people, to make the galaxy a better place." Isaac reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And you will," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "The future belongs to you, Mira, and to all the children like you. You are the ones who will carry on the legacy of those who came before, who will build the galaxy we have always dreamed of." Mira's face lit up, her eyes shining with a bright, unquenchable hope. And as Isaac watched her go, her small form disappearing into the crowd, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a fierce, unshakable willpower. They had come so far, had sacrificed so much, and now with the next generation rising to take up the torch, he knew that the future was in good hands. The galaxy would never be the same, would never again know the darkness and oppression of the past. And as long as there were those who remembered, as long as there were those who carried the flame of hope and justice in their hearts, it never would. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.